This is a presentation of SBE 15, New York City.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce once again VP of Engineering and Technology Policy for the NAB, Kelly Williams.
Well, thanks, everybody. I appreciate it. Just want to say hello to my old friend David Bialik, I saw on there, and Conrad. I've known you guys for quite a while. When they asked me to speak about EAS, there's really so much to talk about. So I'm going to throw some stuff out here, and then really we just kind of talk about whatever you want to talk about after I'm done. But I've been dealing with this for most of my entire career. And there's a lot rolling around in my head about it. Some of it I will have to put disclaimers if I say anything. But anyway, let's get started. So you all have probably heard this. NAB uses it in its messaging all the time. The broadcasters are first informers. And we do this every day. You know, we do programming, all the entertainment, but, you know, there's also weather and emergency information. This is really important. It goes to the heart of our public services broadcasters. And the thing that's sort of interesting and important to understand that because of EAS, broadcasters are listed in numerous government documents as part of the U.S. critical infrastructure. So along with electricity, water, now used to be wireline with wireless communications, energy is broadcaster, and that's a testament to our resilience. I mean, everybody knows how to stay on air. We survive disasters. And that's a good thing. And we get some benefit from that. For those of you who've ever seen these letters that come from FEMA that gain you access during emergencies and things like that. So there's some benefit to all of that. So EAS is kind of my fault. So back in the 90s, when I looked like that, and I had a lot less gray hair, I got an assignment to write a petition to the FCC because our members came to us and said an EAS test, an EBS test was like 2 minutes and 15 seconds. And it was a real issue. People just want to be able to have it fit in one commercial slot or 2 commercial slots. And so we wrote a petition to just shorten the tone and the test and shorten the script to try to get it down to like a minute or a minute and a half, some multiple of like 30 seconds. And the guy a new director of EAS came in. This is during the Bush administration, and kind of took that ball and ran with it. And like 5 years later, we had the EAS, a whole new thing. So part of me is like, wow, that was really good. And then part of me is like, gee, I'm really sorry. So everybody knows about FCC and EAS. So the first half of this is Captain Obvious. And I was going to say, if you don't know some of what's in here, you need to kind of go back to basics. So this is what the FCC thinks its role is, and really in the scheme of things, what the FCC thinks its role is what really is important. It's a big part. They regulate broadcasters, so we have to listen to them. Their partner in EAS is FEMA, and FEMA runs IPAWS, the Integrated Public Alert and Warning System. Again, this is something you should be familiar with. What's vaguely interesting about this slide is the graphic on the, my pointer working? Not really. The graphic on the left is an old system diagram. I don't know, it's probably about 6 or 7 years ago. They plucked it off their website, and I had to go back and find it because it's no longer there. But when you look at this ecosystem, we live right up here at the top. We're one part of this. And what I'm aware of is that, in fact, this ecosystem has expanded quite a bit. The iPause folks, we work a lot with them, and I really can't say enough about the team there at iPause, and the work they do. They are very practical. They tend to be very forward-thinking. They're open to partnerships with a lot of folks, but they don't regulate us, which causes some very interesting situations to come up, and I'll talk about that a little later. But there are a couple things I want to point out about iPause that's kind of curious. The first thing is, and let me start this with a bit of a disclaimer. I'll state a fact here. You can think of it what you will. The one thing that iPause cannot do as a system is carry the president's voice live. And some might say that's kind of their only reason for existing. They are set up as a file-based distribution system. And for whatever reason, they haven't quite yet figured out that if the president needed to go on the air, they haven't quite figured out how to carry that voice live. I'm not sure what the issue is there, but that's something they still work on. The other thing, which I know why this happens, and maybe it's a little frustrating, we can talk about this more later, is with all the work and all the things that the FCC has been asking broadcasters to do, and not just broadcasters, but the WIA, the wireless phone people to do, is, about making messages accessible and so forth. When you think about it, the vast majority of messages that stations get that are requests for EAS alerts, and I put it in that form because you don't necessarily have to carry them, but they're National Weather Service requests. NOAA does not want their alerts passing through iPause to broadcast stations. We can talk about that later if you want, but they don't, and so they're not. And as late as last week, I asked how that was working out, and they're still not coming. So as the iPause ecosystem has expanded, interestingly, this is now the iPause ecosystem diagram on the bottom right. So I'm not sure it's as informative, but it's a really cool looking graphic, and I just put it in there because that system diagram is now replaced with that really cool graphic that is mildly informational. So please feel free to interrupt me if you want. So here's the thing. This is the big picture of sort of where we fit in the ecosystem of EAS and alerting. But that's not our lifetime. That's not how we function. So think about, from broadcaster's perspective, and at one point I had this title, a day in the life of an EAS encoder decoder. So way long time ago, this was as simple as it had. You have an EAS encoder decoder, and it would go off periodically, and it would go to air. And depending upon whether you're radio, TV, or how you design your station, that EAS box might be inside the box that says to air, or it could be someplace else. And then in order to make it work, you had to add a tuner to it. And This was again the old, an RF, an AM tuner, FM tuner. PEP came along at some point, and you have to be able to hear the PEP station. And then iPods came along. Everybody had to go out and get the internet, get internet if you didn't have it. And it was really interesting how traumatic for some broadcasters it was to go get internet. It was an amazingly big deal, actually. But we're kind of past that now, and there are some internet issues with iPods that come along every now and then, like their security certification expired at one point, so nobody was getting iPods messages, but that they took care of that pretty quickly. And of course, NWS weather radio. I mean, folks have that, or you've got one of those cool tuners that have an AM, FM, and weather radio all in one tuner. And I'm not sure how things work in New York State, but there's always some state or local relay. State relay is actually kind of an antiquated term. I'm old, so that's why I use antiquated terms. But there's some connection with local EMS. There used to be a thing called EMNet. It's not called that anymore. That was a satellite based, and you'd have some other way of receiving alerts through to your EAS box. And managing this, because it's grown over time, has come, and particularly with the EAS, with iPause, and some of the things the FCC has pushed our way, has become increasingly more complex. So if you look at this diagram, if you happen to be a TV station, and if you hit that last block, and this goes to the larger part of emergency alerting, not EAS specifically, but all the stuff we do for news, through news and weather, particularly, is really adds value to the alerting overall, not just EAS. But if you're in TV, your life is more like this. Now, let me say, I should not have used the word NDEC. That's a particular product name. So excuse that. The FCC calls it an apparatus. I guess they felt apparatus was an underused word and that they should use it. I'm not sure they were correct about that, but that's what they call it. So this is more sort of how things work. And again, this is a simplified version, but with some of the accessibility stuff that has come along in the past 5 to 7 years, TV broadcasters have had to add a lot of functionality in to make this all work. And again, this is not new. This is where we are. It's what you got to do now. And there are a couple of things that we'll just kind of talk about as we get more to the end and have some open discussion on this. All right, so this is real Captain Obvious. And this is basically what you have to do for EAS, and it's actually fairly simple, maybe not easy. All right, you got to own a box. And I put in here and have it installed because there's always somebody who goes, yeah, we own one. Oh, did I have to plug it in? It's in the rack. Oh, but it's unplugged. Okay. So you need to keep it running. And if it breaks, you can send it out. You have 60 days. You can be without it. Software updates. Let me take a minute and talk about software updates. The FCC cares immensely about software updates, and I'll talk about this a little bit as more and more as we go along. So under the category of keeping it running, if you own an old box running old software for whatever reason, you need to get the newest software from your vendor. That has become a point of contention around the FCC and their opinion of broadcasters and how they're maintaining the EAS readiness. You have to connect to iPods. So you got the internet, You got to connect iPause. So in channeling my Uncle James Brown, please, please, please put it behind a firewall. Certainly not in the great state of New York, but in other places in the country, there are EAS devices sitting on the open internet that you can ping. This disturbs the FCC to no end. There was some hubbub probably 2 or 3 or 4 years ago about a particular manufacturer's stuff being available, people not changing their passwords. That is, it's still admin, or it's your station call letters for password and username. Don't do that. Apply a little common sense and protect your EAS device and your EAS operations. If you're not behind some sort of enterprise firewall, which most stations are now, just go buy one. The cheapest one, maybe not the best one, but the cheapest one on Amazon is like $95. And then go get your neighbor's son to help you program it and put it in. But hopefully it's pretty straightforward. This becomes it has become an increasingly big deal, and we keep hearing about it from the FCC. Although we, NAB, and I personally don't think it's as big a problem as they suspect, that they claim, but it's still an issue for them. You got to relay national alerts and tests. And ETRS, is there anybody on here who does not know what the ETRS is? All right, I'll tell you anyway. It's the electronic testing reporting system. So every time there's a test, a national test, you've got to go in and fill out some forms. Please be very mindful as you fill those forms out. One of the things that we heard back from the FCC is that broadcasters are running old software, or broadcasters didn't do something around a test, or broadcasters. And we had asked the FCC to see some of their raw data and how they came to these conclusions. And what we kind of think is that some stations are rushing through that form. And if you filled out the form before, it will auto-populate certain fields. And you want to make sure that those fields are actually up to date, or before you hit submit, that they haven't auto-filled with something that's an old piece of data. So just, keep that in mind next time the test comes along. And of course, you've got to do the weekly and monthly tests. Those rules have been around for years. There's nothing new about that. And know your monitor assignment. So that has to do with your state plan. I'm not sure who administers the state plan in New York. And in many states, it's the State Association of Broadcasters. But everybody should be familiar.
Same thing,
Yeah. So you should know, who you're going to monitor, and also, is there a local plan? Usually most local broadcasts, and particularly SBE members, tend to be pretty active in the local coordinating committees. So this really isn't an issue, but every now and then there's someone who isn't monitoring anybody, or the station that they're monitoring went off the air and folks aren't aware of it. So, these are really obvious things, but this really gets to the core functionality and rules that you've got to do. And the last thing is, don't forget to log stuff. So, the station log still exists, but really about the only thing that's on it is EAS now. Now, most modern boxes will keep a log of its activities. So should you get, they don't use the word inspected anymore, audited, just make sure everybody, whoever's around master control, or everybody knows how should they be asked, show me the logs of your tests for the last month. I'm sure everybody knows how to do that. It's pretty straightforward these days. Some people have it set up so they dump them out periodically. There are lots of ways you can do it, but I haven't seen anybody dinged for logs in like 10 years. But there's an old football coach said, don't be that guy. You don't want to be the person who's the first one to be dinged for bad logs in 20 years. All right. So,
Kelly, we have a couple of questions on the chat.
oh yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, I wasn't
I'm just
watching
going to
it.
keep monitoring. I know you told people to chime in, so I'll be the chimer.
Yeah,
Andy Gladding says MNet is still around in Pennsylvania.
yeah.
Okay, Dave Bialik asks, is there a FEMA certification for firewalls?
No. I don't think so. I don't believe so. The certification is for the EAS device itself. So the firewall really doesn't connect you to IPAWS. It's there to keep bad actors out of your EAS device. I mean, that's the simplest thing. I have not seen them, and I was walking around their website today, by the way, which is really good. A bit self-serving, as you would expect, but because it's a website. But I didn't see anything about firewalls. But there is a process for any device that connects to IPAWS, and that's on the manufacturer. So even for like alert originators, the equipment that originates alerts, it sends them through IPAWS. They have to get a certificate. It's actually called a conformance test.
And we have a comment from Edwin. Some folks are being told that MNet has to be monitored and can replace one of the two monitored sources. Is that correct?
Yes, it depends on how it's. So this is all state plan, right? So how is your state plan written? I believe that is true for the FCC, but only if it's in your state plan.
Hey, keep in mind, I'm not sure if this was state or city. I think it was state. What was it? 2 or 3 weeks ago, we had an earthquake.
Yes.
And it triggered, what did it trigger? Half hour later, an hour later?
45 minutes.
Yeah.
2 hours
You know,
for me.
they're so I'll get to this at the end, but there's a discussion in the alerting community about why alerts weren't set out for certain events after the events happen. And so what the alert community says, well, we really only alert if we have something to tell you. People knew there was an earthquake.
So
the issue is,
New
what
York
do you
City,
do?
I wasn't really sure that was an earthquake. You think about it could be terrorism. I live in Queens in New York City.
Yes.
So it could be terrorism. And I thought, actually, my first thought was that there was a gas explosion at somebody's house.
It could be.
From time to time.
The thing is, there are kind of these three components to an alert. And one of them there's the basic alert, like, something happened. B is information. The third thing is some call to action. So some of the alert folks say, if we don't have something to tell you, we won't send an alert. Or, and this is the problem in some jurisdictions, that information goes out the PIO, the public information officer. And so it really then becomes a news item. And there may or may not be an EAS. And sometimes EAS gets a bad rap. And one of the things I would say, it's sort of NAB's position that a station really shouldn't be initiating an alert, even though you have the capability in certain products to do it. You probably shouldn't do it. Now, there's a case, Minot, right, where there was a train derailment and a chemical spill, and there was a toxic gas cloud, and no one could reach the emergency operations center. So a station went ahead and triggered an EAS telling people and said, okay, evacuate. There's been telling people what happened. And certainly, that's an editorial decision in your station if you want to do that. Yeah, anyway, okay. So I want to be mindful of the time and then we can talk more about things. Okay, so nationwide tests, and I bring this as a topic, I mentioned a little bit this, or, take these really seriously. The FCC does a really deep dive on the data that they get beyond the report that they published. Oh, wait, they didn't publish a report for the last one. Anyway, okay, that disclaimer. But so, but they came at NAB and some others with a whole lot of data. It's like, hey, broadcasters aren't doing this and broadcasters aren't doing that. And we're like, well, okay, show us. Well, we can't show you. Okay. So the message is, be really careful. Careful when you fill out the forms, because I think, our opinion is that some of these are just clerical kind of error things in the forms not submitted correctly. And, take the national tests very seriously. Because we are critical infrastructure, the FCC wants to be able to go back to the White House and back to FEMA, its partners in this sort of FEMA. This is a committee. I won't bore you with the structure of that. That's an interagency committee that reports up through CISA, that's part of FEMA. The FCC wants to be able to go in with solid data that said, yeah, this happens, it's good. To the extent we can help them out, I think that's a great thing, and it makes broadcasters look good. Because like I said, we are part of critical infrastructure, so we want to be able to say, yeah, we're ready. So that's just a little PSA for this. Pay attention to the test. All right, so let's talk about some new stuff, because there's a lot of new stuff. In trying to prep for this, I wanted to be able to say, hey, in the last 7 years, there have been X number of changes in the rules that required broadcasters to do something, or there are additions or changes or things. And that do something ranged mostly as simply as just getting a software update. And in some cases, you had to do a somewhat major change depending upon the age of your box. And it's starting to get a little tedious. But it's kind of the price we pay. So we try to work with the FCC. But let's just talk about some of the more recent ones. So unless you live under a rock, the beginning of this year, you're required to implement a function by which if you receive a message, a legacy message, SAME is the coding structure, if you don't know, is part of the daisy chain, that before you set out an alert, your EAS device has to go check to see if there is a matching alert from iPause. And the reason for this is one of accessibility and being able to give more information, principally for TV folks, in terms of text that might be there instead of the kind of man on Mars with a tin can and a string audio that often comes with the NWS alerts. Oh, wait, NWS alerts don't come through iPause. So right now, you will never find an IPAWS where you get a tornado warning, flash flood. We get a lot of flash flood warnings down here. You'll never see one. You won't see one currently. Let me not try to predict the future. Right now, you're not going to really see one. And one of the things that we had argued for the FCC, because this was principally about getting text on the screen, more text or more complete information on the screen, we asked Commission that radio shouldn't be required to do this. They disagreed, and I think everybody knows sort of what happened there. It was a more challenging upgrade than I think both the two major manufacturers thought it would be. Some people waited too late, but also just in some cases, it took a while to really get that out. So there was, although I think the FCC was very liberal is not the word, but they were very open to granting, they did grant a blanket relief for Sage products and extending that date. And for the people, there were some people who had DAS, DASDEC products that had some issues. Some of the DASDECs had to be returned. I don't know how many TB people are on here, for instance, a TB product. They had to be returned and they got backed up and there were some shipping issues and things. And they were pretty open for doing that. And I did see one request to not do this at all. And I'm not really sure what happened or what the resolution of that was. So we've kind of hit with that. We got our stride there. And then the commission sort of came out with this proposal for multilingual alerts. So the commission has for about a decade been thinking about how do you do alerts in more than one language. And this is a really important thing. FEMA has been thinking about it. FEMA actually has a directive there was a FEMA Reauthorization Act from about 10 years ago, 7 years ago, before the pandemic. So things before the pandemic were a bit of a blur to me, time-wise, that actually required FEMA to come up with this. They haven't quite figured out how to make this work, except that what they all agree, and this has been NAB's position, is alert originators need to craft the message. Sending a message in English to an EAS participant, so this is not, not just broadcasters, but everybody who's part of this, and expecting us to take the responsibility to properly translate that message, or choosing what languages to translate it in, we didn't feel was the appropriate way to go, that the FCC through FEMA should establish relationships with alert originators and the manufacturers of alert originating equipment and get it done that way. So one example in Florida, and this goes back almost 20 years they've been doing it, the state EAC issues a number of the major hurricane flood alerts in 3 different languages. They do them one after the other. And we said, that's a great model to look at, how they do that, and getting folks in jurisdictions to say, we know who lives in our community. We think it's English and Spanish and Portuguese. Another community might say it's English and Spanish and Chinese or Japanese. Interestingly, in Florida, they do an interesting patois, which I didn't know existed, but that's what they do. But the commission didn't agree. So now, so when I say they didn't agree, they called us before they put this item out. So it's a notice of proposed rulemaking. It came out, comments were due just the week before the NAB show. And thank you, FCC, for having no consideration of my personal schedule. But you know, we and a bunch of other folks said this is a bad idea. And I'm happy to talk about it in depth if someone doesn't know about it. But it basically, the government would create pre-translated templates that would be stored in the EAS devices. And so they would be both text and voice. And when alert comes around, like a tornado alert, for example, the box would spit out the tornado, the TOR, and it would the word for TOR, the text that goes with that, and it would do it also in a second language. Now,
Or third, or fourth, or fifth, or sixth, like New York City with multiple communities. And would that have to be
yes,
done with a monthly test as well?
yes. Yeah, maybe yes. I mean,
Yeah.
it's an interesting conundrum, because there's a document called ESIG. ESIG was a group that got together and basically wrote a document how you translate um, CAP messages into SAME messages, and some other basic, we would call it an implementation guide. And it was done by the same people who developed CAP. So it's all the folks you know at the EAS manufacturers and some other folks who have been around in the EAS space for quite some time. And they actually had some forethought on how you do this. But the thing is that what they recommend is that you would do, again, this is from an electronic standpoint, and keep in mind this document was written 20 years ago, that you would do an alert. So you get brat, 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 you get the alert, brat, brat, brat. So that ends the alert. And then you follow with the text or the voice in the other language. In any event, for those of you not familiar with how the FCC does things, there are a couple of kinds of documents, and there's a document that's called a notice of inquiry. And a notice of inquiry is where the commission is thinking of something and they want to get feedback on what they're thinking. Typically, that comes first, followed by a notice of proposed rulemaking, which is we thought about it and here's what we think the rules should be. Now, community, tell us what you think. This notice of proposed rulemaking is full of a list of questions that really, when you look at it as whole, the whole thing doesn't really make sense. Now, I have to tell you, I got to take a little fault with this too, because when the commission staff called us and talked about it, we said, yeah, look, we don't know that the commission has a role here. You need to work with FEMA to make something happen. I happened to mention that some years ago, 7 or 8 years ago, I chaired a working group. It was part of an FCC advisory committee that looked at multilingual alerts. And one of the examples, and basically the conclusion was, alert originators need to create the alerts. And they create them, we'll figure out how to carry them. But in Minneapolis, there was a pilot program that was funded through a grant where they sat down, they got community leaders together, and they created templates for the most common, like 15 most common alerts in the Minneapolis metro, and work with a manufacturer to store those in the product. But it was more verbose than just simply translating the header code. And what the commission is proposing, if I understand what they're saying, and I'm not clear that I do, they would only translate the header code. So there's a lot, you have to stay tuned for this. There's a lot going on. What I will say is the FEMA IPAWS people filed comments on this and told the FCC that this was really not a good idea. And they were miffed because the FCC also called FEMA and called the iPods office and says, hey, we're thinking about do this. And the iPods folks say, that's probably not a good idea. And everybody else the FCC called said, what you're thinking is not a good idea. Let's work together to find another way to do it. So we don't know where that's going. Other than some conceptual, like, yes, it's a good idea to do multilingual alerts. We think local communities are better suited to figure out what the right way to do it is. So I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen with that. But we'll probably have to. I don't know. I don't know. We'll see. FEMA putting in comments holds a lot of weight. So we'll see what happens with that. Let's talk about new codes. Every couple of years, in some cases more than a couple of years, the FCC makes up, poor words. The FCC believes they should add new alert codes. And that's a really simple thing to do from a software perspective. Except that alert originators have to get the software too to have new codes. The newest proposal is for missing indigenous persons. And it was based on a petition filed by the Inuits in Alaska. So apparently there is a very significant missing population. People wander off and they're just never found. And it is somewhat, I had to do some research on this because it seemed terribly specific to me, but it is a pretty big problem. The commission has proposed a somewhat more generic code. The Inuits in Alaska came back and said, well, we don't want a generic missing person code. We want one specifically. So we'll see how that plays out. Clearly things like Amber Alerts have had a significant impact. It's a great benefit. There are some other alerts like the Silver Alert, which is a missing elderly person, Blue Alert, which was added, which has to do with, I guess, an injured police officer. I haven't seen any of those. That's not true. I've seen one Silver Alert. So maybe there is a case for doing some alert around missing persons, but it also could be handled as a news item, and it very often is handled as a news item. And I'll go back to that page, just think about that page of things you have to do. Everything else is optional. I mean, it's your station's editorial decision to whether or not you want to carry any local alerts from a regulatory standpoint. But it's pretty much a good idea that you do carry. If somebody your local authority issues an Amber Alert, and also if it's in your state plan or city plan or local plan that you carry it, then you really need to carry it. So I don't think there's really any question there. But every time the commission changes rules, there's going to be some cost, and there's a cost, the NRE, the non-recurring engineering cost for the manufacturer to develop and implement it. Sometimes that's simple, sometimes it's not. We've said in all of these, and we will probably, I don't know what NAB will say about this new code coming up, but to really think about when you implement this, if you do something with multilingual and you do something with new codes, can you bundle them together so that we're not in a position where we got to get one software update, and then 3 months later do another software update. So this is really significant when you get off the coasts. And because I'm sure as many of you may be aware, when you get to the middle part of America, you've got one engineer covering 4 and 5 radio stations. And those stations are 100 miles, 200 miles apart. So, this was an interesting thing with the update around the first of the year, where a bunch of stations said, yeah, I mean, it'll take our guy a couple hours to do the software upgrade when he gets here, but he may not get here for 2 weeks because he's covering 6 radio stations in a county, or all of them in one state in one particular case. There was a group of guys who were doing that. So the commission just needs to be aware of that, and what's going on. So I want to talk a little bit about an initiative that NAB has come through mostly our radio members and our Radio Engineering Advisory Committee. And this is the concept of virtualizing EAS. So let me say that doesn't mean cloud, has nothing to do with cloud. It's our members saying, we want to be relieved of the hardware responsibility. That when you look at a modern broadcast station, almost every function now exists as some sort of virtualized service. So, and again, stop me if any of this isn't making sense. So when you look at your encoders, with radio, TV, video, all these are software instances running inside of virtual machines. And many manufacturers are getting out of the hardware business and saying, here's software, you buy a license for that software, we do all the things that you would normally do if it was a piece of the software, except you have to buy a new license every year, or renew it or something. But you're probably paying for service contracts anyway. So we brought this up in a cybersecurity issue. We've talked to the commission many times. We're having a lot of conversations with manufacturers around that. There's some pushback in it, but we'll see what's going on. But there are a number of, particularly radio stations, radio groups that own a lot of pieces of hardware, and they're sort of in the hardware management business, not the EAS business. They want to get out of the hardware management business. And we really think that putting EAS inside of, for those of you who are running enterprises for your broadcast infrastructure, putting it inside makes it easier to do these software updates, software changes, and makes it more secure. So we're getting low on time, so I'll just conclude and just ask if there are any questions or anything.
I'll read some of the comments that were put in the chat while you were speaking.
Right.
Okay. Wow. Okay, there's more. Sorry, I'm gonna have to go quickly. Okay, so from Cody, there were some Temple students doing senior film last October when who aired a transmitter true EAS tone, which caused an alert to be triggered. That's a part of why the new Section 11 regulations are important. I guess this is the comment about the earthquake. A lot of people thought it was garbage trucks passing by. Dave Bialik, are there separate EAS rules for internet-only streamers that want to serve their audience?
There are no rules.
So I'll add on to this. Someone who streams it. So I run a digital signage business on top of my broadcasting duties, and I know there are folks that ask me, and I know other people provide emergency alert messages. But as you mentioned, you need a device to do that. There's no way of pulling EAS or iPause messages without having a decoder, right?
Yes, there is. but they're not, you have to have a client to filter it. And that's the FCC has been struggling with this for a long time, and they will continue to struggle. The streamers, let's just say you just want to do the streamers, right? And that's not unreasonable. So I'm streaming audio, I'm streaming video, I'm looking at Netflix or whatever, something happens, you want to get an alert. So in next gen television, there's a way to send an alert to the TV receiver. And again, this is a client side thing. When you look at people, and I don't want to speak for somebody else, but one of the really big streamers who also owns a whole lot of radio stations, they have the ability, because they know who's listening and they know where you are. So they theoretically have the ability to send a message. But it's unclear that the FCC has a regulatory authority to make those folks do things. So they have the authority over EAS, but it's unclear. So that's a TBD thing. And thank you, whoever brought up the whole tones. I don't know how I left that out. Please don't do that. If you go to the Enforcement Bureau and you look at EAS violations, the only EAS violations are for the occasional person who doesn't have a working box, is the false tone. The commission hands out whoppers of fines. $250,000, $500,000, $750,000 fines for this. Do not do this. If your program manager says, "Hey, we want to," say no.
Make sure you check out the one
fine. Put somebody out of business.
A football game that they used as one of their sound effects, an EAS tone. And
yep.
You familiar? I guess you would know about this. Hey, I want to see if Anthony wants to talk a bit, because he mentioned here that he's running around the country working on FEMA PEP stations.
Yeah.
Give us a real super quick summary. What's going on there? Anthony,
can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, well, right now I'm a contractor for FEMA. I work for a company that's contracted by FEMA, and I'm servicing PEP stations all across the country presently. Pretty much entails making sure that the FEMA Operations Center can connect up to these PEP stations at any time. So it's pretty much maintaining all the SATCOM infrastructure. A lot of it's done over PSTN, POTS lines. And they're just starting to roll out a feed from Sirius XM as well as another monitor source for the PEP index. So
yeah.
Do you find, Anthony, you find out that many of the places you go to are not running well, that you have to do a lot of work there, or they've ignored their receivers, anything like that?
Well, what I do is kind of separate from what the stations themselves are doing. So the stations have studio index that they manage and maintain and take care of. I'm pretty much taking care of the FEMA index. They're special. They're essentially EAS encoder decoders, but they've got special firmware in them that only react to messages from FEMA.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Some of those facilities have studios and food and water and
quite a few. So FEMA's in the process of rolling out new facilities. They're actually building a bunch, about 6 a year, which are entirely hemp protected, and one module will have backup power in it in the form of like a 50 kilowatt Kohler generator, and then the other module will have actually a backup transmitter and a little mini studio in it, and that's also loaded with MREs and sleeping quarters and an incinerator toilet. So yeah, it's ready to go for the end of the world.
Hey, can you comment on any of them in the New York City area?
I can comment that the PEP station in your market is WABC in Lodi.
And oh yeah, too bad we don't have the chief on. Got to ask him about that on next time I see him. Okay.
I believe they're on the docket for an upgrade soon, so they'll probably be getting the hemp protected modules real soon. Oh,
that sounds like an SBE meeting at their place.
Absolutely.
Any thoughts on EAS enhancements to take advantage of any ATSC3 capabilities? That's from Mike.
No. I shouldn't have said it quite so emphatically. So our thinking right now is that ATSC3, what can happen in ATSC3 should not be EAS. EAS is its own thing. There are some things I think that the commission and FEMA could do to improve it, like add authentication, like get rid of SAME, come up with a new thing with some authentication in it, things like that. But we want broadcasters to have the flexibility to make editorial choices around what it's called AEA, Advanced Emergency Alerting, and what that is. And there's a lot of work within ATSC looking at things like common look and feel if you get an alert and stuff like that. So we would sort of like the FCC to stay out of it, but we also want them to acknowledge that that's a big part of what we want to do. And keeping in mind that it is very much a client side, broadcaster sends the data, but the receiver does the work. And so there's a lot of work within what's called the broadcast application to be able to facilitate getting an effective message out and how people will react to it. And there's been a lot, actually quite a bit of work done along there. But I still think there's a little bit that has to be done. But the general feeling is we kind of want the FCC to kind of stay in their lane, because we don't want to force someone who doesn't have the staff or the ability to create those kinds of messages to be forced into creating those messages. We want people to have the editorial choice.
Okay, last question of the night. It's from David. Is there going to be a mandate to teach the public about all the alerts?
Boy, I don't know. And I don't know what that mandate would be. I mean, I don't know. I mean, this is the problem with the whole paradigm, right? It's not, if you read that thing, and I suggest you start with coffee and end with wine.
The FCC,
or beer, whichever your whiskey, whatever your choice is. But there's just a lot of questions in there, and a lot of us we didn't really understand how this is going to work. So some of it is patently obvious, like a Spanish station. So the requirement was a Spanish station has to do it in the second language. Well, if you're a Spanish language station, isn't the second language English?
English.
I don't know. I don't know. Anyway,
The
answer is no. There was no such proposal. But I suspect if a station started doing it, that you would self-promote somehow.
The FCC, way back when the first whole EAS came out, put the emphasis on it's the station's responsibility to inform the public about what all the codes mean. And I'm sure that they still want that to happen.
Yes.
All right, that's good. Good closing note. Thanks, George. I want to wrap it up because everybody looks hungry. Just want to remind everyone. Well, first of all, I want to thank Kelly Williams for this presentation, and you've demystified and remystified us at the same time. It sounds like there's a lot of work still to be done by a lot of different parties. So I appreciate you breaking it down for us. Thank you so much for your time and being part of our SBE chapter meeting.
Thanks for joining us. Please remember to subscribe to SBE 15 New York City.